Want a high-end white tablecloth steak eating experience right at home? Join us at Bid on Beef. Connect with hardworking American Angus and Wagyu ranching families to source your beef from a trusted and reputable source. In a fast-paced and fun auction process, you're in the driver's seat with Bid on Beef. You choose the cuts, you choose the price, and you choose the ranch. Buy with confidence knowing beef will soon be shipped to your door. So savor the win and the thrill of victory knowing sizzling steaks are in your future. Learn more at bidonbeef.com.
Okay, everybody. Hey, thanks for tuning into the Bullpen Podcast. And my name is Les Vogler, part owner of Vogler Semen Center, Vogler Cattle, the Nebraska Bull Service. In today's episode, we're going to cover IVF with Boviteq. And with me today, joining from Boviteq, I have Shantille Campbell and then Melanie Vogler Weiniger. So Melanie is actually my daughter, and I had a little trouble saying that for the first time. So thanks, ladies, for joining me today. And let's just jump right in this. Shantille, why don't you give us a little bit about your background?
Sure. So I am a native Nebraskan. I've known the Vogler family for, probably a couple of decades, and worked with them through knew of them, I guess, through different breeders as a kid, bringing bulls there to collect. When I was in college, we did the tour of them during the repro class, and really kind of a full circle moment when they became a satellite center for Boviteq. So now they house and care for donors when we do the OPU process, and I get the pleasure of talking to Mel and Les on a pretty regular basis. So it's nice to have my home state represented by such a well-known family that our family has been friends with for a number of decades.
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah, I've been friends with your dad, mom and dad forever. So Mel, tell us a little bit about yourself. How long you've been my daughter forever. But
yeah, as long as I know.
as long as you know.
Yeah, I've been working at the Semen Center for 15 years. Grandma trained me. Along with you and Lauren, it's been great. These past couple of years working with Shantille and learning more about the IVF process, and being able to add that to our list of things that we offer our customers.
Yep. And when did we actually started IVF? What year, Shantille, with Boviteq? 2018?
2017.
2017, did we start that? Okay.
Yeah.
Cool.
Yeah.
Cool. So 4 or 5, gosh, long time. So,
yeah, it's been a while.
Okay. So give us so you're obviously with Boviteq, and we do IVF. And for those of you that don't, when we say IVF, what does that mean, Shantille?
So IVF means in vitro fertilization. In vitro just means in glass. So when they started doing this decades ago, everything was done in glass. Of course, now it's plastic, but the name has remained the same.
Okay.
For the in vitro part. If we compare that to the counterpart in vivo means in the body. So in vitro fertilization simply means fertilized in glass.
Right. Okay. So why Boviteq? Why did you went to, where'd you get your schooling at?
So I went to the University of Nebraska for my undergraduate degree. I went to Colorado State and studied under George Seidel for my master's. Okay. And then I did my PhD at the University of Minnesota, and I looked at the impact of nutrition and body condition score on early embryonic development and pregnancy.
Okay. So then when you graduated, did you did you start directly with Boviteq, or was there other companies? Or
I started directly with Boviteq. So it was their first full year in business was 2014. So I came on in July of 2014. It was a little bit like the rocket ship quote. You didn't really know exactly where I was going, but I wasn't going to miss that ride. So they did put a lot of things in my hands as a fresh grad.
Uh-huh.
And proud to have been able to help grow the business. I think we're about 5,000x where we were in terms of cycle volume compared to the first year in business. So it's been great.
Mm-hmm. So with the IVF, would you say probably between beef and dairy, obviously I would imagine probably dairy is light years ahead of the beef right now?
So the two services or the two beef and dairy use very differently. So within what Boviteq does as a company, we're about 60% dairy, about 40% beef. If we look at that industry wide, it's about 75% dairy, 25% beef. The big thing that really changed on the dairy side is genomics in 2011, right? You could tell the potential value of that calf by the time they were at max 60 days old, right? Can test them and get those results back within 3 to 4 weeks. So you know if she's going to be capable of being a donor or a bull, right? So that really changed how they handled young stock. On the beef side of things, generally, folks like to know that she's going to raise a good one, or she will have won a number of shows herself or sold high on a sale, right, before they qualify her. So there's a huge difference in terms of the age of donors we work in beef versus dairy. So on the dairy side, believe it or not, about half of the donors that we work are less than 9 months of age.
Wow.
Yeah. And on the beef side, 96% of what we work is over a year.
Okay.
About 90 is over 2 years. So we're definitely working with a more proven population in general on the beef side versus the dairy.
Something that maybe I've noticed, and tell me if I'm wrong, but especially with the IVF, it seems like at the beginning of IVF, we would get, on the beef side, you would get a lot of cows that were maybe so-called problem cows with the conventional flush. And then people wanted to IVF. Is that true, or?
Yeah, so absolutely. So IVF can help overcome some issues that conventional flush may not. So if we think about, and I'll just put up slide 3, here's got an image of actually going into actually ultrasounding, and you can see that fetus below. So when we think about that aspect, we're going directly into the ovary. We're not touching the uterus. So we're not worried about that calf in the uterus. That being said, if we're talking about an animal that's problematic, so let's say she flushes and they recover a number of unfertilized structures as an example, that can be an indication that there's a problem with fertilization in the oviduct, or she could have little recovered, but she still seems to have a lot of CLs, like when that goes in as cancer. That could mean she's got follicles, she's got oocytes, but she's got an oviductal blockage somehow. And so those aren't getting to the uterus. Another issue is just poor quality after flushing. That could be she just doesn't have the uterine environment, enough progesterone to create a good quality embryo during that process. So we can kind of bypass those issues. The other big thing is on semen. So the same concept, right? Generally speaking, we're going to breed her 2 to 3 times for a conventional flush. So if you have a super valuable bull, I think I've used the example of the Wagyu bull before, but we had a Wagyu bull that was $50,000 a straw. You're not going to put $150,000 worth of semen into one donor, right?
Not the normal.
So in that case, we can use a single straw that would cover up to 20 donors in this case. So it's a more efficient use of sex semen for sure compared to conventional flushing as well. And a lot of folks like that when we think about stuff that's really limited availability.
So you've seen those benefits. And then also another one, when IVF was so-called new to the beef industry, a lot of people capsize.
Yeah. Yep. So when IVF really first started in the mid 90s, it was used mostly in terminal cases. And so it wasn't, the adoption rate was incredibly low. It was really, champion show cow breaks her leg. We put her in a float tank until we can collect her, and then we do the last collection, and then we euthanize. Because it was kind of a last ditch effort, they were putting a lot of growth factors into the media to ensure that they would make embryos in pregnancies, and those growth factors impacted essentially calf size and maternal recognition of pregnancy. So there was a paper done in 2001 by Pete Hansen at the University of Florida, and he essentially looked at a lot of additives in the media, and a big one was related to serum and bovine serum albumin. And essentially everybody that wanted to remain competitive took that out of the parts of the media where they could see that influenced. That being said, we do see especially when we breed very young donors to very young bulls, there can be some large calves, and that's true industry wide. About 1% of the time we do see a calf over 120 pounds. But we can mitigate that by obviously ensuring that we know when a recip is due and inducing if they haven't calved by their due date.
Yeah, that's something I've just learned myself within the last year or two. If you're sure that your recip is due to the embryo that you put in there, and what Lauren and I, my brother, we like to do, if on that due date, we will go ahead and induce them, or maybe even a day or two ahead of that. Normally, when you induce them, within 36 hours, you usually have a calf on the ground?
Yep. So, and we, of course, recommend doing it in the afternoon or evening, so that hopefully they have an opportunity to calve during daylight hours the next day.
And why is that? Sometime with a recip cow, sometimes they will go 7 or 10 days over. Why is?
Yeah. So, there's something in the process, right? Every time we take a step away from what is natural with, conventional pasture breeding, if you will, being the most, going to AI, conventional flush, IVF, the cloning would be the farthest from that. We do cause a little bit of, there always can be an opportunity to cause disruption in maternal recognition of pregnancy. So that animal just not realizing that she's pregnant. And sometimes it's associated too with her not bagging up. And so guys are like, oh, maybe she's not, we'll let her go. That's kind of the worst thing that you can do, because in those last days of pregnancy, a calf is gaining up to 2 pounds a day. Exactly. So if you let her go 10 days over, that's 20 pounds.
Yeah, exactly. So that's very interesting. So obviously you're with Boviteq. So what are some of the, I like to call them the Boviteq benefits? Yeah.
So a big thing worth pointing out is we're really focused on individualization. So there's some, I would say, other groups that say, 1, we don't treat donors at all, or 2, we're going to treat them all the same. At Boviteq, we're hyper focused on individualizing each donor and really optimizing each animal for the desired outcome. So we just had a conversation here last week about, hey, there's a new donor coming in. This is the shot schedule she's coming off of. How do we best kind of match that to what we're after this week? And that's a lot of what we do, because the protocols that we start with are going to work for about 2/3 of cows, but there's an ability to tweak. We can either increase that FSH, we can increase the coast time, so the time from the last shot to OPU, and allow those oocytes to mature more. And basically what we're doing is we're just increasing our opportunity to get an oocyte that is at the best maturity, most likely to create an embryo and a pregnancy. So we really focus on that on the donor side. Same is true on the bull side. Right. And if I could give anybody 2 pieces of advice that says, how do I get the best results in IVF? 1, treat your donor like she's a donor, like she's the most valuable animal on the farm.
Exactly.
And 2, really look at your bull choices and try to optimize bull choice too. So you might have, say, hey, here's 5 sires that I want to work with. Regardless of the lab, obviously we want you to work with Boviteq, but if not, regardless of the lab that you work with, they keep data on that. So they can look and say, hey, of these 5 bulls, I think 2 are performing above average, 2 are average, and maybe 1 is below. That should help you sort your choices. And then at Boviteq, something that we do more so than any of our competitors is that we test bulls. So we actually have access to a cow kill plant in Green Bay, and we get slaughterhouse oocytes. And if we say, hey, I know this is a 2-year-old Angus bull, generally 2-year-old Angus bulls work best at this condition. We're going to do basically 1 higher and 1 lower. And at the ideal condition, we're going to actually use it to fertilize slaughterhouse oocytes. And then we'll stain those, and we look to see, do we have unfertilized? Do we have normal fertilization? Or do we have polyspermy? Polyspermy being too many sperm fertilize the same oocyte. And then based on that, we can cherry pick those conditions. So we've already got the bull figured out when we go to use them on your valuable donor's oocytes, rather than essentially do an experiment by using that bull the first time on client oocytes. So those would be the 2 things I would tell customers: treat your donor like a donor and optimize that bull. Make sure you're making the right choice on that side.
Right. And that's something I try to tell people. They say, well, why do you want to do this and give her the shots? I said, well, if she's your best, your donor should be the top of your herd. Why treat her like the average one? Okay. Yeah. We want to treat them all good, but we treat some better than others. Yep. Right? Because at the end of the day, you want results, and we feel like we get the best results with this. So you mentioned FSH, Shantille. What are some of the benefits or in the impact of FSH? FSH?
Yep. So I've got a slide here, Cam, that's slide 9, and then we'll do 10 and 11 as well. But the ATA, which is the American Embryo Transfer Association, collects data from veterinarian members. So there's, in any given year, there's going to be between 400 and 600 members of the ATA. So these are actually the veterinarians out doing the work, flushing the cows, putting in the embryos, aspirating donors. And to maintain your membership, you have to submit your stats. So it's a pretty robust data set from the people who are actually doing it. And the last time they separated FSH versus non, they demonstrated that on average, you get 6.2 embryos per donor with FSH, 2.5 without. So you're doing 2.5 times more collections. You're paying for consumables, the aspirator's time. You're slowing your genetic progress tremendously when you're not using FSH. And not only that, but not using an oocyte that turns into an embryo that was not derived in the presence of FSH is less likely to result in a pregnancy as well. So you get fewer embryos and you make less pregnancies from those embryos, even when stage and grade is controlled for.
Okay.
So that being said, a bottle of FSH, we get the argument that that costs money. No doubt it does. But what is one more embryo? What is 4 more embryos worth to you?
Yeah.
What is 2 more pregnancies worth to you? And I think
Well, that's
most
the bottom
guys,
line is the pregnancy.
and I think almost everybody would tell you that it's worth a heck of a lot more than a bottle of FSH. So I think one thing that is a good way to illustrate it, if we have any listeners that took a repro class back in undergrad, we remember tracking the estrous cycle and follicular waves. But I have a slide up here, and essentially the light blue are growing follicles. So we have recruitment, selection, and dominance. Dominance is occurring in that red stage, and really that that red area is where we're looking to find the most mature oocytes, again, most likely to result in an embryo and a pregnancy. So think about that as our competence window. If we look at the periwinkle color, those are follicles undergoing atresia, so they're dying, and this happens naturally. So animals recruit follicles and then they die off. I mean, that is what happens naturally all of the time, regardless of pregnancy. Obviously after puberty is achieved, generally speaking, but even prior to puberty you do have follicular waves beginning to occur. So what FSH does, it doesn't cause any additional recruitment of follicles, but it rescues those that would otherwise die. So when you have a system where you don't include FSH, you don't set them up, right? So you can set them up on GeneRH and be somewhat synchronized.
And do her that day, but nothing.
If you do that, you're basically playing Russian roulette with a follicular wave. So if you come in, this first arrow as an example, those are growing follicles. They're all going to be small follicles. You're going to get immature oocytes, really low embryo development, and you're going to probably have poor pregnancy rates from that group of embryos. This next arrow as an example, you're getting all atretic follicles, so those that are dying. This next example, you might get lucky. So you have a couple kind of on that window, just kind of coming into the window, and then you've got a couple that are mature. And here again, you're going to get a group that are undergoing atresia, and you might get 1 or 2 good ones. So, and you hear those people in those systems that, oh, I did great this one time, and then I did her again and again, and I had poor results. So that's why, right? You got lucky and you came in at a good time. So we don't like to rely on luck at Boviteq.
No.
We like to rely on science. So the way we do it, we come in, we use either DFR or GnRH basically to clear off that ovary so that we're starting with a new follicular wave. The reason that we do that is in cattle, any monoovulatory species, anything that just wants to have one at once, once that follicle gets big enough to become mature, starts releasing a hormone called inhibin that kills off the other follicles. So if you have a dominant follicle on there and you're feeding in FSH, that's the only one that's really benefiting from it. The others are essentially dying or being inhibited during that time. So we go in, give GnRH, or we remove the dominant follicle, and then we add to cedar. A cedar is important because oocytes best develop in the presence of progesterone. We often hear, hey, I went to competitor X, my pregnant cows do so much better than my open cows. Absolutely. Pregnant cows have progesterone. So we override that by putting in a cedar. And then we're coming in and we're giving FSH. So the difference here on this slide is we don't have that atretic cascade. We don't see follicles dying off, right? They're all rescued. They're all brought to that high competence window. They're generally, most of them are going to make an oocyte that's good quality, that's going to result in an embryo and a pregnancy. So that's why we do it the way we do.
Awesome. So Mel, obviously you're involved in this process also. What tell us a little bit about what you do on OPU day. What's your responsibility? Not only on OPU day, but coming into it with working with the producers and stuff. What all do you do?
Yeah, so I get the information, the donor information, donor history if they have it. I send that off to Boviteq. I will work through shot schedule, like Shantille said, with Shantille and with our vet, Dr. Clem. And then on the day of, I'm in the lab and Clem will bring me over the tube with the oocytes in it. I go through and I filter out all the junk. I find the oocytes. I grade them based on meticulous they have, and then I put them in the mat tubes and ship them on their way to Boviteq in Wisconsin.
Exactly. So you made that all sound so easy, but it's really not. And this is something that maybe some other, I'm not sure how everybody does it, but I've been to other places where they're doing IVF or whatever, and you walk into the room and they might be wearing their coveralls or whatever. You walk into our IVF room and OPU room, it's basically
sanitized.
It's sanitized and it's 87 degrees. So the whole way through the process, we're very particular on how we do that. And Dr. Clem Neely from SEK is the vet that we work with that come up and does the actual. When we say OPU, Shantille, what is Dr. Clem doing?
Yep. So OPU means oocyte pickup. So he's essentially going into the cow, palpate rectally, get a hold of that ovary. There's a probe with an ultrasound transducer on the end of it and a needle guide running through it. So that goes in vaginally. He brings those ovaries up to the probe, visualizes where the follicles are. The follicles contain an oocyte. So he punctures into those follicles, and that's all. That system is hooked up to a pump, and that pulls the follicular fluid and hopefully an oocyte with it. That all is collected into a 50 ml tube, and then that's what's handed off to Mel to then search and identify the good quality oocytes to come to the lab.
And I've noticed like some people will bring in their cows and they'll say, well, I've had her IVF somewhere, and we're getting 100 follicle. And I'm like, okay. And, and then what is the average? Why is that? Because we don't see 100.
Yeah. So in those cases where and don't get me wrong, there are certainly animals that can have extreme responses. But that being said, on average, again, we'll go back to those AUTA stats. On average, you're looking at about 22 oocytes per donor. And those that have a tremendous number of oocytes, they're probably collecting incredibly small follicles that are very small in diameter. So generally at Boviteq, we like to avoid anything less than 5 millimeters, so half a centimeter, because those contain oocytes that are too immature. And by puncturing her an additional 60 times to recover immature oocytes, we don't think that's a benefit to the cow, and it's certainly not.
So the longevity of the cow, when you're doing it with FSH and everything, you're actually improving her life and extending it, and the more times you can flush her. So Mel, and you notice this because you're actually going through there and grading these oocytes then, and the amount of when you say amount of cumulus, what is the cumulus?
The cumulus, that is what kind of feeds the oocyte, correct, Shantille?
Yep. So those are the support cells that surround the oocyte.
Yeah. And when I go through, I don't see, because of the way we do it, we don't see a lot of the immature oocytes. So I'm not having to pick a lot of those off. I'm just really finding most of what I see are good quality oocytes.
And you've also worked with some slaughterhouse oocytes. So do you see a big difference between?
Yeah, definitely a big difference. A lot more cumulus on the oocytes pulled from live than on the slaughterhouse. A lot nicer looking oocytes than
the one that's at Clembry. Okay, awesome.
Yeah.
Awesome.
So the power of FSH.
Yeah, absolutely. and then you mentioned something, that some producers notice that their pregnant cows work better. So obviously, we can do OPU or IVF on a pregnant female. Explain a little bit that.
Yeah. So one thing, like I mentioned earlier, people comment about their pregnant animals doing better. It's because oocytes need a source of progesterone during development. So if they don't have a CL or a pregnancy, we need to supplement with a cedar. That being said, we can absolutely and are happy to do pregnant donors as well. Again, we talked about, kind of showed that image before of bypassing the uterus, right? So if she's carried calf, no problem. We're not disturbing that uterus at all. We're going directly to the ovaries. And generally speaking, a donor can be collected every 2 weeks up to 100 days gestation.
Okay.
There is a little bit of variation there. Obviously, your vet's going to have to get in there and see what things look like, because once that gravid horn migrates over the rim of the pelvis,
They just can't reach it.
They just can't reach it anymore. But I would say generally we feel confident over 90% of cows can be collected up to 100 days gestation.
It's kind of interesting because we've had some customers bring them in and their cows are actually a little bit further along than what they inform us of. So what would you say, Mel? Probably 120 days is probably the maximum.
That's the max that we've been able to do.
Because otherwise Clem would just say it's too far down there and stuff. So,
and less along those same lines. So one of the things that I feel like we're probably getting a little bit more away from in recent years as beef producers turn to using IVF instead of conventional flush. But I would say 5 years ago, it was super common to hear of guys having donors that they would never get pregnant. They just kept them open to continually flush. Yeah. Generally speaking, you need 6 to 8 weeks between conventional flushes. The beauty of IVF, so if you compare doing conventional flushes 6 to 9 times a year, we're keeping her open on top of that. So she's getting fat, stale. She's not coming in with the rest of the herd. If you're using OPU and IVF, you can do it in pregnancy or when they're open every 2 weeks. So that's 6 to 9. You could do 8 to 10 with IVF, and you're still maintaining that calving interval, and she's nursing a calf, so she's not going to get overly fat. So we have a slide 17 as just kind of an example of some theoretical dates that you could do that over. But the biggest benefit that I see is you're just not working with stale donors anymore.
Do you feel like the donors that do go ahead and carry a pregnancy will produce better?
I would say yes, but I would say that's not necessarily related to being pregnant. It's related to body condition score.
Gotcha.
An overfat animal is not going to respond well to FSH.
Okay. Great. And then how about the difference between, obviously you can have fresh embryos or frozen. Do you notice much difference there?
So we really don't see a difference in our pregnancy rates. And I would say that's absolutely something that's a standout for Boviteq. Our competitors can't say that. But I would just give you one stat again from ANTA that really shows the confidence that our producers have in that. So on average, only about 30% of the beef embryos made in the U.S. industry-wide are frozen. At Boviteq, 91%.
Wow.
So one, we're making a better quality embryo, and two, people know that our frozens are going to produce pregnancies. That is a tremendous difference. One advantage to fresh, I would say. So if we sort it beef and dairy, so the dairy side of things, right? They're obviously calving all year round. They've always got recips available making pregnancies. So you do have a little bit of cost savings if you make 3 or more embryos and you ship those fresh. You have a little bit of cost savings on the lab side. That being said, you have to have a skilled veterinarian or technician day of to be able to identify those embryos, grade and stage them, put them in a straw, transfer. But there is a little bit of cost savings on that side. And if you've always got recips available, that model makes sense. The frozens, on the other hand, you are going to lose a small percent, 9%, that we say aren't freezable. Yeah. You're going to pay a little bit more in terms of freezing them at the lab. But on the backside, generally, whoever's putting them in charges less for putting in a frozen versus a fresh, because they're just pulling out of the tank, putting in the uterus.
We found that the folks that do ours, they'd much rather put it in the frozen than fresh.
Yep, it's a lot less work day of transfer. And again, this is probably no surprise to any beef producer listening, but generally we see beef guys will stack those recips, set up a group or two, and they might just transfer 2 days out of the entire year, versus on the dairy side that might be transferring every other week, 26 times a year. So those models kind of lend themselves to a little difference in terms of fresh and frozen. But we don't have awesome beef data in terms of pregnancy. And by awesome, I mean, we don't have a lot of information collected. We have a hard time, guys say, oh, I'll let you know when they calve. So we don't have a lot of good pregnancy data from the beef side just because it's not well reported. But that being said, if we look at the dairy side, we do have data on about 11,000 embryos from more than 10 locations, and we're within a percentage point on fresh versus frozen.
It's awesome. So Shantille, is there anything else? I mean, how can folks get a hold of you personally? What if they want to talk to Boviteq, how do they get in touch with you?
Yep. So our client service team is great at directing any communication based on what type of question that you might have. An email is probably the easiest way to send that. So we're at Boviteq USA at boviteq.com. Otherwise, you can give the office a call as well. They're in Madison, and they'll direct you to anybody.
So Madison is your main office.
Madison is where everything started, and that's kind of still the main hub. Okay. That's worth pointing out. Les, we do have locations in Syracuse, New York, Turlock, California, in Jerome, Idaho, and Gilbert, Arizona, coming here in a couple months. So
awesome. So and they're very well established in your labs and stuff. I went and visited the one up in Madison just recently. It's an awesome facility, and great people if they're working. Mel, if anybody wants to get hold of us, how do you recommend them contacting us if they want to do work with us?
Yeah, they can email at voglersemen@gmail.com or call the office. Me and Brianna are usually always there to answer, 402-944-2584.
All right. Is there anything else, ladies, you'd like to add to today's conversation?
No, just appreciate the opportunity to visit with you guys, and appreciate the 7+ years of partnership and a couple decades of friendship.
Absolutely.
So,
Yeah.
Thanks, Les.
No, we really appreciate you. And like I said, I always like to say, in order to do business, you got to surround yourself with excellence. Even though Lauren and I and Mom, we've surrounded ourselves with Shantille, and I'll brag about my daughter and Mel, with people that are way smarter than we are. And that's why we're able to do what we do. So thanks, ladies. Really appreciate it. And we'll see you soon.
Thanks, Les.
Yep.
A Hurrdat Media Production.